Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's VIN-dow with Robert Holmeshead. Good May Day to you, Bob.
Beautiful springtime day, ain't it?
It sure is. It sure is. Now, the market's the market, but I always like to kind of question you and say, have you seen parallels to this? Like, what was it like in 2008? Can we draw any similarities between the two different types of markets? Should we? And are they actually comparable? So I think looking back is a way to look forward sometimes, but what's your thoughts on the market and maybe looking back to look forward? And should we even do that?
I think it's a good question, Sean. I'm glad that you asked the question because, believe it or not, I was having frequently my dear friend John Wolfram gave me the VIN, and I swapped notes after a sale day to understand the similarities. It's shocking, actually, frequently how much it is a one-to-one relationship. We like to believe there's a regional variation in markets, but the more that we do this, I've said it actually for decades, there is no difference. As long as there's simulcasts, you're going to find that there's very
few. For our listeners, you're in the Northeast and he's in.
Yeah, we're in the Manheim, Pennsylvania, and Johnny's down in the Texas market. And we're both all over the country only because of simulcast. So we sell more cars in the Carolinas than we do in Pennsylvania by far. So it's like a regional, but a broader regional thing. And I think car by car, you could find a blip here or there, but there's a very a small. It used to be two-wheel drives when we were kids. We'd go from Darlington, South Carolina, and drag two-wheel drive trucks there and bring four-wheel drives back, and there was an arbitrage opportunity, right? And when we're swapping notes yesterday, and going through different things, segment this, that, what happened, and all this, right? It's what we find is we're both coming to the same conclusion. Not that there's no doom and gloom. There's no, we're not doing anything. We're not going to stop doing business. We're going to have 700 cars at the auction tomorrow. So it's not like any problem, but there's no question over the past 3-4 weeks, coming off the craziest high of all times, including COVID, the beginning of this year, inexplicably, the hottest thing that we've ever experienced. We're coming back down off of it. So this is springtime. It's not supposed to be springtime you're coming down. But typically we always have a mid-spring pause because dealers get all pumped up the beginning of the year. They buy cars. And 90 days later, which is where we are now, they figure out that they paid too much in the enthusiasm of buy cars. And now they are like on the sidelines in the grandstands watching because they can't buy cars for $3,000 less than they paid for them in January and not say, hey, boss, look what I did. I bought a great car $3,000 less than the one I bought you 3 months ago. I mean, you start to look like a dumbass. You follow me? And as a result, there's like a little hesitancy. This is a little bit, what we're seeing is a little bit more than hesitancy. Of course, the greatest one in the world still brings rocket money, and it's so much more than any other car on it. But when we get to the 93% of normal cars, even if they're good normal cars, they're not the ultimate car that brings rocket money. You're seeing fewer people that are logging in. There's fewer people that are actually buying. There's more arbitration because they get buyer's remorse. And these are indications that are, again, and not to sound like Santa Claus or something, I've been doing this for 50 years, and we see it over decades of, how things and when you can predict and when you can't predict. And you can never predict because when you predict, you're always wrong. But these general indicators typically aren't wrong. And what we're seeing is a withdrawal of the hunger of the market. And you could start talking about they got this and they something else, and now they're discounting the Ford and all that. So all of that's fine. And then we look at a little deeper. Well, what happened? We go back to the first and second gas crisis. What happened when it happened, and what happened after, and who actually was the benefactor? It's the guy that actually understood that if he bought a Cadillac Eldorado for a quarter of the price and was paying 3 times more than a Renault Le Car was worth, when it settled out, the Renault Le Car went back to zero, was worth $1,200, not $5,800. And the Eldorado you bought for $3,200 was now worth $11,700. So, it takes time. Now, so you go to the next one, the credit default swap circumstance of 07 or 08. I have no recollection on when it was, but I remember it distinctly because in those days, where, obviously if you're in the wholesale business, you're in the auction business, and you're not there to liquidate, you're there to hopefully make a little profit on something. You're always looking for arbitrage opportunities, right? In those days, the banks were closing. I don't know if anybody has a memory good enough to understand that, but Wachovia, which is Wells Fargo, was closing down dealers and taking their inventory, and they needed buyers, and they weren't going to sell them at the auction, so they got 300 cars, and if you got the money to buy them, we bought them and we took them to the auction, and regardless of what they brought a month or 2 months ago, we bought them at a price where you actually could make a really significant profit. And because you sell every car that hits the auction block, you got the critical mass watching, and the opportunity exists. So when we look at your average gross profit in our management system to see what it was at different points in time, you could say, well, geez, if you were looking at this, you'd never know that we had like a disaster in 07 and 08 or whatever the date was of the credit default swap disaster, right? There's another thing that it's easy to forget because, like as we're grinding what we do today, we forget about what the anomalies were of that day. And today the export thing going from Canada to the U.S., obviously there's a lot of cars coming here because of it's not that the cars are worth more, it's the monetary exchange that's different. In 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, the export market from the United States was the core, the basis of our business. In other words, if we went into in my case, a Lexus dealer and bought 40 cars a week, I was paying way more than a car was worth, a normal car was worth, and would lose money on those cars almost 100% of the time, only to get to the RX 300 with 114,000 miles. Because you buy that one for $4,200 and get $11,700 for it at the auction. Why is that? It's got nothing to do with the local market. It's got something to do with the export market. It was going to Kazakhstan. It was going to Russia. It was going to some other place where maybe the cars went in the time machine or not. But when they got there, the value was different. Why is that? Well, not just that there was no used cars available other places in China or whatever, right? It's because of the money exchange made it totally a viable enterprise. So in 2007 or 8, when we had this anomaly of export that we were totally dependent on, which made it easy to do business with regular cars, and it didn't matter if you made money or not, because when you threw it all against the wall, you still had an amazing average on every car. It just wasn't from the one that you would anticipate, or the dealer that was selling you the cars would anticipate that that's where it's coming from. Does that make any sense to you, Sean? And now when we look at what we have today, where this market's getting a little weird, and the used car dealer is having a little trouble getting floor plan. Not everybody, but floor plans are getting a little more difficult, and obviously the floor plan costs double or triple what it did the year before. And when the curtailments start coming, it's like triple painful, right? Because you bought the car in a great market in January or February, you didn't sell it yet. Now it's curtailment time, and now you're getting it up to the gazoo after you reconned it and moved it. And if you wanted to bring it back to get part of your money back, it's not going to be possible, right? And we don't have, let's say, something else to associate with just normal doing business, buying a car, bringing it home, getting it ready, trying to sell it, didn't sell. Yeah, and now what's your next little maneuver, right? It's almost impossible to trade cars for free because the people that bought them 2 or 3 years ago I'm talking generalities here, but typically speaking, are completely crushed in those cars because they paid, $2, $3, $8, $10, $20, $50,000 over sticker. The probability of having equity there is really low, and it causes what you would, in very crude terms, you would call constipation, right? So I don't see like something that you could exaggerate then to let's say counteract what I'm saying, what I believe the consensus between a couple of us little guys that do fairly large degree of trading and pricing and on software for thousands of dealers, right? What you're seeing is a weird. I'm not saying it's crystal clear. It's a little foggy because nobody can predict anything, much less me predict anything. But if someone was asking how you feel about it, I'm going to tell you honestly, it don't feel good. It feels weird, man. And I don't picture what's going to pop up out of the. We're not going to. I don't picture this market jumping back to a end of December, beginning of January, February, and March thing where everybody's just going to be dying to buy cars from you again. Again, these are generalities. You can always point to this or that or the other thing to say, well, this car, blah, blah. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, like in general, the way that the thing is moving. We got a lot more dealers, a lot of dealers that used to use on the new online platforms to get their trade. It ain't working. They ain't getting nowhere near what they need to sell. Hey Bob, where you been? We got 80 cars to sell. A lot more of that happening for a couple of reasons. One, there's a laser beam check attached to it. You understand? There is no arbitration. There's no arguing over the thing or the. You're getting the check and you're going home. It's not how'd you do on this one? What'd you do on that one? No, it's basically it's finished business. That tells me that you're starting the controller, the person that runs the dealership. The owner don't run it. The controller does. We've said that many times. Simple fact of life, right? When they start whining, it rolls downhill. It hits the owner first after the controller starts to whine because the electrical shock goes up the owner's rear end, right? And then it filters down to the GM, to the used car manager, and all of a sudden, not that it's a panic attack, but it's just that notion that, is, and then they're looking at what it costs them. Don't forget, a lot of new car dealers own their used cars because of the amount of money we made through the pandemic and so forth. But when anybody looks at how their money's doing, whether you're paying for the money or it's your money, you want to get paid for, right? That also, so you only got $8 million in inventory. Okay, I got you. But that $8 million costs money, right? And then when the stuff starts getting a little weird, I think what we're feeling is just a general, I wouldn't call it malaise, but a little bit of a thing that's sneaking in that I think we could be in for a little bit of a circumstance that ain't going to be, the dreamy thing that we had in the beginning of this year or in the middle of 2020 or 21. I just have a funny feeling about this, and it's not a good feeling, and it's not because I'm an old fat moron. I think it's because our senses are showing the indicators that it's. You got to remember one last thing, and I'm going to shut my trap up. The backbone of the valuations of all cars has nothing to do with anything other than used car dealers. Used car dealers absorb the trash. Used car dealers are the people that set the prices at auctions because new car dealers bid occasionally, but very rarely. And used car dealers are the ones that actually take those cars out the gate. They paid for them, however they paid for them, a floor plan, their cash, whatever. They take them. They're the ones that are the last end users. I look at it constantly in our management system and overall. Used car dealers are the backbone of our industry. Period. End of the story. There's nothing to talk about. You look at who registers for an auction and who actually buys the cars at an auction. It's a very small, tiny percent of new car dealers that actually are active. They're there, but they're not there deep. In other words, if we were dependent on them to buy the cars that go there, and I'm talking about $300,000 cars, and I'm talking about $1,000 cars. Who actually buys those cars are typically not new car dealers. It's a very tiny, tiny fraction of new car dealers that participate in auctions. It's a tiny percentage in comparison to the sharecropper used car dealer who's there every week doing their share of business that actually dictates the ultimate end value, finding the best end user of the car under the hammer, right? That's undeniable, and debate that topic with anybody, anytime. I don't care what kind of statistics you have. I'd love to put that in open forum. And it's not a matter of anything other than we get no respect as used car dealers, but we're the ones that actually are the skeletal backbone of the industry. Period. End of the story. Anybody wants to say something different, it's a fart in the wind. It means nothing because it's not based in fact, right? And when the used car dealer, general dealer, those 38,000 registered dealers, right, are struggling, A, to have working capital, B, to be able to get the cars if they're in the retail business, God bless you if you are, to be able to get them financed, the direct electrical current, it lands back in the auction lane where the appetite to buy cars, not just the best one of the day. I ain't talking about that because you don't live on selling one out of 487 cars. You live out of selling 487. So not the one that you could, oh, he's crazy. That car, these cars are bringing crazy money. Yeah. And then analyze what it is you're looking at. You're not looking at the general. You're looking at the specific. And what we're talking about is the general market and used car dealers holding up the values. And why I think we're going in a direction that's a little ugly, it just boils back to, the undeniable economic facts of interest rates going up based on incompetent. I don't even talk about that. The people that run and make policy for us could be the most incompetent people in the history of the world. That's got nothing to do with anything, right? Because the reality is, what we're left to deal with, finding a floor plan for a guy or getting a car financed once you finally found a willing buyer. These little stumbling blocks, I think, are going to continue to get worse, and I don't know what would cause them to get better. And as a result, the market in general, the people who are absorbing these cars, will not have the appetite to actually do anything other than supply and demand. The demand's going down. The values are going in reverse. And I think that's going to cause even more constipation because this is spring. It should have a little bit of a hangover, but it ain't a hangover. It's a decline. So when we get to the traditional decline, the next two traditional declines, 4th of July, no more convertibles. And, the model year change, September, along with the normal hurricane that we use as like the reason why the market was no good today. Yeah, those two little declines that leads us to the rest of the end of the year. I think when we add these things up, we're still going to hit this thing in 4th of July. No question about that. Whether things are good or bad or whatever, that lull or that little, everybody's on vacation. Yeah, no, the market changes, getting ready for the model year change. And I think you add all that together and we could be in for a little bit of a little more of a declined general marketplace than what we would like to have. And I'm the most optimistic human being that's ever lived. I'm just stating what is keeping me up at night and validating it with a guy that's selling more cars than anybody's ever sold at an auction. And I think we're seeing it precisely the same way, which unfortunately leads us to the conclusion, if it looks like a fish and it swims, it's probably a fish. You follow me?
Well, thank you, Bob, for the macro outlook. It's timely, and we'll get it out to folks.
Sorry if it was too wordy, Shawnee, but I get a little emotional about this shit. Have fun, guys.